Disarm our fleets? The Council just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The notification packet arrived at Observation Tier 3, Plinth Row B, Position 12 at the 7th hour, carried by a Drevuon Registry clerk whose throat sac glowed the dim amber of routine. He set it on the gallery table beside a case that was already there. Already closed, Nessa Vale did not open it. She was already standing, had been standing since the 6th hour, when she had read instrument 10,848 in the agenda index and understood that the thing she had been waiting for had arrived. Below the gallery threshold, in the accord chamber of the hegemony seat, 52 delegate plinths sat in their concentric arcs. 7 steps descended from the gallery threshold to the chamber floor. Nessa Vale had counted them the first time she walked them, 31 years ago, and had not walked them since. She knew the count. Velcheroth, Veltharian species, senior chair of the Compact Authority, called the session to order. His secondary membranes, the pale structures behind each primary eye, lay smooth. Certainty, in a Veltharian face, looked exactly like that. The instrument had been built over 18 months by Serev Dai of the Gorith Bilateral Assembly, its 4 upper arms folded in formal rest at his plinth, and it had passed preliminary committee without objection. Drun Yale, senior archivist of the Compact Authority Registry, began the read. His throat sac glowed the same routine amber it had held through 10,000 sessions before this one. Instrument 10,848. Filed under the Compact Authority's Sovereign Capability Review Framework, proposing species, the Gorith Bilateral Assembly, represented by Delegate Serev Dai, Subject Party, Compact Observer Species 771T, designated Observer Provisional, Non-Sovereign. Classification notes: pre-institutional governance structure, primitive in treaty-making capacity, crude in military organization, non-sovereign in registered capability. Instrument classification, disarmament order effective on ratification. The instrument directs Species 771T to withdraw all armed capability from compact-administered space within 1 standard cycle and to submit to authority inspection at the conclusion of that cycle. The vote ran in seated order. Thun of the Meluan secondancy, small gray-scaled mandibles oscillating in the Meluan equivalent of arithmetic, voted against. 3 of his block with him, 47-4. The instrument carries, Velcheroth said. 47 in favor, 4 opposed. The ratification window is open. 24 hours. Nessa Vale adjusted her stance, left foot flat on the gallery floor, right heel lifting, fractionally. She read the notification packet. The record required formal receipt and set it down. The case beside her was heavier than it looked. It always had been. If you have just found this session, that was the whole instrument. 1 disarmament order, read into the record in under 4 minutes, carrying 47 votes, opening a 24-hour window. The woman standing in the gallery is Nessa Vale, envoy arbiter for the Terran Diplomatic Registry, and her heel is just barely lifted off the floor. In the next 24 hours, 52 delegates and 1 archivist are going to understand what has been sitting in that case for 31 years. Stay with her, 41 colonies, 9 million people. The birth valley where she had been born lay inside that number, along with 8 valleys she had never visited and 12 settlements that had not existed when she filed her first compliance report. The Compact's protection window covered all of it. The moment instrument 10,848 ratified, that window did not close. The concept of closure implied a door that might reopen. The moment it ratified, the window ceased to be a category that applied to any of them. She was 19 when she filed the first report. The Compact had renewed under her registry number that same week, a coincidence she had noted, because she noted all coincidences that touched instruments she was responsible for. She had watched 6 subsequent renewals from Position 12, the salt-dried transit biscuit her mother had packed for every assignment since the first one sat in the lid of her case still sealed. The Chamber's preparatory work for ratification began at once, which was to say that Drun Yale began assembling the ratification paperwork, and the delegates moved through the procedural motions that preceded a 24-hour window with the efficiency of a body that had completed this process, 10,847. Her mother's rule, inherited from her mother's mother, from somewhere in the long record of people who had learned that you do not eat until the filing is done, times before without incident. Serevdai gave a brief statement that was entered into the session record. The Gorath Bilateral Assembly has observed species 771T for 8 consecutive renewal cycles without a single objection filed. A compliance category species that has renewed 8 times will not object to a 9th procedural instrument. They are pre-institutional in their governance, non-sovereign in their capability, and primitive in their understanding of how instruments work. They lack both the standing and the will. His upper arms remained in formal rest. He had designed the instrument carefully. He was correct about the compliance record. He understood it as evidence of a particular kind of incapacity. He was not wrong about the evidence. He was wrong about what the evidence meant, but that was a distinction that would not become available to him for several more hours. Druniel pulled the full registry index, because Druniel always pulled the full registry index. He had been senior archivist for 19 years, and in 19 years, he had never submitted a ratification packet without pulling the full index first. It was not required. It was simply what he did. The registry scan populated his display in sequence: designation history, filing record, current status. He began reading the designation history. His throat sac dimmed briefly, then brightened without warning to a luminescence it did not normally produce before the 3rd hour of a session. He read the line again. He set his stylus down. Velchereth's membranes registered the movement in his peripheral vision. An archivist did not set a stylus down in the middle of a pull. Archivist. A moment chair. This was not a phrase Druniel used. Velchereth's membranes remained smooth, but the quality of their smoothness had changed in a way that would have been very difficult to describe to someone who had not spent 11 years watching them. Serevdai's press statement had already been transmitted. The chamber carried the ambient sounds of an institution in routine operation, the soft percussion of styluses on entry surfaces, the low translation relays cycling. Around the chamber, Serevdai's forearms rested folded in the formal position that communicated in Gorath body language that a piece of work had been completed to specification. The circulation system's barely perceptible hum that had not changed since the chamber's construction, and that Nessa Vale associated, after 31 years, with the smell of her own coat. Thune's mandibles had not slowed. They moved in rapid oscillation, cycling through whatever calculation occupied him, while his eyes tracked Druniel's display from across the chamber floor. Chair. Druniel's voice had its usual calibration. I need to request an emergency floor session. State the basis. I am reading the registry index for species 771T. There is a status flag that requires floor resolution before the ratification packet can be completed. The chamber's ambient sounds did not change. Only their quality shifted in the way that the quality of light shifts when a door opens in an adjacent room, altering the source without altering the level. Read the status, Velchereth said. Druniel read it. Species 771T, observer provisional. Arbiter designated floor loot active. The chamber was quiet. Read that last designation again. Floor loot active. Velchereth turned to his display. His secondary membranes moved, not a splay, not yet, but a ripple that communicated to anyone who had studied them. The preliminary stage of a splay, the moment before certainty became something else. This was the first movement of his membranes in this session. Fine said quietly from his plinth, read section 14, subsection C. He was looking at the gallery, not at Druniel. There was a procedural pause while Druniel located the founding instrument, not in the current session archive, but in the compact founding repository, sub-level 4, which was where original instruments from the first year of the Accord were held. This took 4 minutes. The chamber waited. Serevdai's upper arms unfolded from formal rest in the way that arms unfold when the body owning them registers something requiring a recalibration of posture. He refolded them. Deliberately. Druniel found page 4. Section 14, subsection C, he read, any instrument affecting the sovereign capability of a compact observer shall be subject to floor address by the observer's designated arbiter before ratification may proceed. No instrument shall ratify until floor address is complete. The chamber was quiet. Serevdai said, The clause is a formality. It has never been invoked. Drunyale's throat sac was at full luminescence. That is correct, Delegate. It has never been invoked. His throat sac did not dim. The brightness was not excitement. In Drevon physiology, bioluminescence indicated information pressure, the state of a body that had encountered data whose implications it had not yet finished processing. Then it is a formality. Sirev Dai said. An uninvoked clause is not a null clause, Thune said. It is an unexercised right. Those are different categories. The delegate from the Meluan secondancy is welcome to file a note. I filed a note, Thune said, 8 years ago. Renewal Cycle 6. It is in the registry. Nessa Vale in the gallery above opened her case. She removed 3 items and placed them on the gallery table. The founding instrument, 17 pages, its first page carrying a countersignature in Terran diplomatic script, faded but legible, Yian Kale, Year 1 of the Accord. Page 4 was open, the 17 compliance filings, stacked, and a third document sealed, with that day's date on the cover, which Drunyale could see from his plinth at the chamber floor's axis. He read the cover. His throat sac brightened further. Thune watched Vale. His mandibles went still. In Meluan biology, the mandibles ceased movement in 2 conditions, sleep and the moment before something irreversible. The substantive argument was not complex. Either the clause was enforceable, in which case ratification of Instrument 10,848 could not proceed without floor address by Nessa Vale, or it was not. The procedural debate over enforceability of Section 14, subsection C, ran 6 hours and contained 11 submotions, 4 of which were procedurally redundant and were so ruled by Velchereth within the first 90 minutes. In which case, Thune's filed objection from 8 years prior constituted a standing note in the registry with no operative effect. Drunyale was asked to read Thune's objection into the record. He read it. Filed at Renewal Cycle 6. On the occasion of the 7th compliance filing by Species 771T, note entered under delegate authority, Thune, Meluan secondancy. The Observer Provisional Clause under Section 14, subsection C has not been stress-tested against an instrument of this category. Recommend review before any action affecting sovereign capability. Is that the whole note? Velchereth asked. That is the whole note. It was marked, noted, non-binding. Sirev Dai said. It was marked non-binding. Thune said. It was not marked incorrect. Sirev Dai requested that Drunyale confirm the current enforceability status of Section 14, subsection C under the Compacts Clause validity framework. Drunyale confirmed that uninvoked clauses did not lapse under any provision he could locate. Sirev Dai requested a review of that finding. The review consumed 40 minutes and confirmed the finding. Then Velchereth asked Drunyale to summarize the subject matter of the 17 compliance filings in sequence. Drunyale read the subject headers. The first 7 were compliance confirmations, standard renewal submissions, no unusual content. Filing 8 introduced a proposed registry framework for bilateral contact between observer provisional species and full member species. Submitted informational, no action required, filed and accepted. Filing 9 expanded the framework with a proposed signatory tier. Filing 11 contains a clause establishing Species 771T as an independent registry entity with standing to file instruments under compact procedural rules, contingent on acceptance of the filing by the authority. The filing was accepted, Thune said. Filing 10 proposed a contact protocol index. Filing 11 introduced a registration clause that Drunyale read slowly and then read again. He looked up. Very quietly. The filing was accepted. Drunyale said, without review of its operative content. The cover page logged it as informational. The clause is on page 3. The chamber was quiet. 17 accepted filings, Thune said, and we stamped them all. He looked at the chamber. No review was ever conducted on any filing after the 7th, he said. They were simply accepted. We read the silence as compliance. We were wrong about what we were reading. Nobody answered him. The question of whether that statement was an observation or an accusation was not immediately resolvable, and the chamber's silence reflected that difficulty. In the gallery above, Nessa Vale did not move. The case sat beside her, its lid still open, the 3 items visible. She had not touched the sealed document since placing it on the table. She had not eaten the biscuit in the case lid. She had not eaten at any point in the preceding 14 hours, not because she was without appetite, but because the rule was the rule. You do not eat until the filing is done. Velchereth said, archivist. Read the clause in filing 11 precisely as written. Druniel read it. The clause was 26 words. In its context, an informational submission from a compliance category non-sovereign species, stamped and shelved without review, those 26 words had generated no discussion, no flag, no cross-reference. In the context of the document currently sitting sealed on the gallery table, those 26 words were the mechanism by which everything that followed was possible. And this was accepted, Velchereth said. Accepted. Year 33 of the Accord, 8 years ago. 8 years ago. Velchereth was quiet for a moment. Then he asked about feelings 12 through 17. Drew and Yale read their subject headers, each one built on the framework established in 11. Each one had been received, logged informational, accepted, and shelved. No clause review had been conducted on any of them. Archivist notation on filing 12, Velchereth said. Read it. Drew and Yale found it. Archivist notation, filing 12. Observer demonstrates unusual procedural literacy for a non-sovereign designee. Recommend clause review at next renewal. Was the review conducted? It was not. Velchereth did not say anything else about that. He turned to his display and was quiet for a period that lasted approximately 10 seconds, which in the context of a chamber session was not a short period. The Section 14, subsection C enforceability ruling came at the 11th hour of the session. Velchereth delivered it from the presiding chair, which meant standing because rulings of founding clause application were required by compact procedure to be delivered standing. He was standing. His secondary membranes were splayed, fully, visibly, without any intermediate stage, in a way that the chamber had not seen in 11 years of his tenure. Section 14. Subsection C is a founding clause of the compact instrument, countersigned in year 1, active on ratification and at no point lapsed or revoked. It is enforceable. The ratification window for Instrument 10848 is suspended pending floor address by the arbiter designate for Terran Observer Provisional. This is a procedural directive, not a motion. It does not require a vote. The arbiter designate is present and holds floor rights under Section 14, subsection C. The deadline for ratification is extended accordingly. The arbiter designate may address the floor. That is the order of these proceedings, and I will have it executed in this session. He sat. In the gallery, Nessa Vale picked up the sealed document. She took the case in her left hand. She did not look at the chamber below, not yet. She looked, briefly, at position 12's armrest, in her second decade at that position. At some point she could no longer precisely recall. She had scratched 4 words and a registry number into the armrest surface in Terran diplomatic shorthand. The words were, "We are still here." Left foot flat, right heel still lifted, the same stance she had held in the gallery. The small shift in weight that nobody in this chamber had been watching for and that she had not been aware of making until the 3rd or 4th year. She had not scratched them as defiance. She had scratched them as a filing note, which was the only kind of note she knew how to make. She descended the 7 steps, when it had already become the stance for the moment before the unsayable. The chamber was silent. 52 delegates watched her descend. Thune's mandibles had not restarted. She did not look at the gallery when she reached the chamber floor. She set the sealed document on the record plinth at the floor's axis. She stood at the record plinth and she restated Instrument 10,848's terms exactly, not a paraphrase, not a summary, the precise wording of the disarmament order, in the language the motion had used. She did this because Nessa Vale did not answer a thing until the record was clear on what the thing had said. The chamber listened. Several delegates who had voted 47-4 for the instrument heard its own language read back to them and understood for the first time that they had not been particularly careful about what they were saying. "I want the record to reflect that Tara has noted the instrument," she said. She placed her left hand on the case at her side. The case that had sat at position 12 for 31 years. The case that was heavier than it looked. "Tara will not contest the disarmament order. We will withdraw from it." Serev Dai's upper arms unfolded from formal rest. He began to speak. She did not look at him. "We spent 40 years learning your registry language," she said. "We filed 17 instruments in it. Everyone was accepted. We would like the index entry to reflect what the filings actually say." She placed the sealed document more precisely at the center of the record plinth, the way you place something when you want the placement to be in the record as a fact and not merely as an act. Druniel was already reading the cover page. His throat sac was at luminescence levels it had not reached in this session and possibly in this building. The hum of the chamber's circulation system carried, as it always carried, the translation relay's cycle. The ambient sounds of the institution continued without interruption, the way they always continued, the way they had continued through 10,848 instruments before this one. Velchereth said, "Archivist, open the document understanding protocol and read the contents into record." Druniel broke the seal. The document was instrument 10,849T in full. It ran to 41 pages. Druniel read it in full, which took slightly over an hour, at the same pace and with the same tone calibration he used for every other instrument he had read in this chamber. He did not dramatize. The instrument did not require dramatization. Its first section was a withdrawal notice under Section 22 of the Compact Founding Instrument, Terra's formal withdrawal from observer provisional status and from the Compact's protection framework, effective on the instrument's ratification. Its second section established a bilateral registry framework, a new signatory tier independent of the Compact's authority, under which any species or polity currently registered in the Compact might file for bilateral contact with Terra. The framework's terms were stated in the Compact's own procedural language, clause by clause, the way you write something for a record that will outlast the room you're writing it in. Membership in the bilateral framework carries no compliance obligations. Druniel read. It is simply a record of who wishes to remain in contact and who does not. He continued reading. The framework's geographic scope was described using the Compact's own territorial registry codes. 41 codes were listed, 9 million registered residents. The framework did not describe these numbers as leverage, it described them as geography. The Compact's protection framework had always moved in both directions, but the direction facing inward toward Terra, toward the 41 colonies, toward the Birth Valley and the 8 valleys Vale had never visited, and the 12 settlements that had not existed at Filing 1 had never required any delegation in this chamber to think about it carefully. They occupied registered Terran space because the species in the protection window had been a compliance category, non-sovereign observer provisional that had renewed 8 consecutive times without objection. Around the chamber, 41 delegates were doing arithmetic. Not mandible arithmetic, the kind that involves a registry map, a territorial code, and a question about which jurisdiction's protection framework a given colony had been relying on for the last 31 years. Velchereth's secondary membranes went still, not flat. Not splayed. Still a quality different from both, that had no prior occurrence in this chair's 11 years to compare it against. The membranes simply stopped moving entirely. From 7 steps away from the chamber floor, Nessa Vale could see them. She had been at position 12 for 31 years. She had never been close enough to see them clearly. She was close enough now. She watched them go still. Her heel was still lifted. 41 colonies. The Birth Valley, she watched the membranes. Druniel continued reading. The reading concluded at the instrument's final clause, which was a contact protocol index for species wishing to file under the bilateral framework. Druniel set the document down. His throat sac was the brightest it had been in this session, not with the sharpness of a new disclosure, but with the sustained luminescence of a body that had finished processing something very large. Serev Dai moved immediately. Chair, the motion before the chamber is to reject Instrument 10849T on the grounds that Species 771T lacks standing as an independent signatory and therefore lacks authority to file under compact procedural rules. The filing should be voided, Archivist, Velkareth said. Read Filing 11's operative clause. Druniel read it before Serev Dai could continue. The 26 words that had been stamped informational and shelved in year 33. The 26 words that established independent registry standing for Species 771T, contingent on acceptance, which had occurred in year 33. The clause was precise. It was unambiguous. It had been drafted in the Compact's own procedural language by someone who had spent 40 years learning how that language worked, and it said exactly what it said. The chamber waited for someone to second Serev Dai's rejection motion. Thune's mandibles were still... 41 delegates were still doing arithmetic. The arithmetic was not complicated. It had become less complicated with each page Druniel read. Several of them had, in the previous 90 seconds, located their own colonies in the territorial registry and confirmed their position relative to the framework's geographic scope. Several of them had also, separately, located the bilateral contact filing under the framework. It was very short. It asked for a name and a registry number. It had been designed to be filed quickly in under a minute, by any party that wished to. Nobody seconded the motion. Velkareth waited. His membranes were still. This was not the stillness of certainty. It was the stillness of a calculation that had not finished. The chair, Velkareth said, notes that the motion has not received a second. He looked at Nessa Vale. She looked back. Her left foot was flat on the chamber floor. Her right heel was lifted, fractionally, the stance she had held since the 7th hour, since the notification packet arrived, since she had read the agenda index and understood that what she had been carrying for 31 years had now become necessary. Envoy Arbiter, Velkareth said. You stated that the framework was complete at filing 14. The framework was complete at filing 14, she said. That was 6 years ago. We could have filed 10 years ago, she said. The framework was complete at filing 14. We chose to carry 3 more cycles instead because we wanted the record to be clean. 41 renewal votes, 8 cycles, 17 accepted filings. The record is clean. She picked up the case. She did not fill the silence. Thune's mandibles restarted, very slowly, the oscillation resuming at a tempo that was not the rapid arithmetic of the session's early hours, but something measured, deliberate, the motion of a body recalibrating rather than calculating. His 8-year-old note was in the registry. It had said what it said. He had been told the item was procedural and that the chamber would be grateful for brevity. He had been brief. Serev Dai's upper arms had folded back into the formal rest position. The fold was visible to anyone who had been watching his arms during the session, and Nessa Vale had been watching as not quite the fold of completion. The fold of completion was smooth. This was something else. This was the fold of a body that had been instructed to appear in formal rest and was attempting to comply. The chamber's circulation hum continued. 3 of the 41 delegates whose colonies sat in registered Terran space had already located the bilateral contact filing. One had begun filling it out. He stopped when he noticed that the delegate at the adjacent plinth had also located it, and he waited, and the delegate at the adjacent plinth waited, and neither of them filed, because filing first had implications that neither of them had yet finished thinking through. The 24-hour ratification window for Instrument 10,848 had 12 hours remaining. It no longer mattered. The disarmament order could not ratify until Nessa Vale's floor address was complete, and Nessa Vale's floor address was complete, and an independent signatory filing could not be blocked by a rejection motion that had received no second. Velkareth said, to no one in particular, Archivist, what is the ratification protocol for an instrument filed under independent signatory authority? Ratification by absence of sustained objection. Druniel said. A seconded rejection motion constitutes sustained objection. An unseconded motion does not, and the window, standard. 24 hours from filing time. Filing time was, the instrument was placed on the record plinth at the 11th hour and 4 minutes of this session. Nobody raised a sustained objection. A delegate from the Outer Arc Meluan contingent, one of Thune's block, looked at the window record on their display and spoke. The ratification window closes in 11 hours and 22 minutes, they said. For instrument 10849T. The window is open, Velchereth said. Chair, what is our position if we do not file for bilateral contact terms before the window closes and the framework ratifies without us? Velchereth's membranes were still. That question is not procedural. It is the most procedural question in this chamber right now. Nobody answered. Velchereth did not answer. The chamber sat with the window open. The weight of what was in it was not arithmetical. It was the weight of a thing that had been built over 40 years in plain sight, in the compact's own procedural language, by people who had been classified as non-sovereign and had continued building anyway. Seref Dai's press statement was still in the session record. It would remain in the session record. A compliance category species that has renewed 8 times will not object to a 9th procedural instrument. They lack both the standing and the will. The instrument it had been appended to was no longer the longest-standing item in the day's record. The question of what to do about the bilateral contact filings was not immediately resolvable in this session. 3 delegations had filed. 6 more were drafting. The representative of the Veltharian Administrative Compact, not Velchereth's personal filing. He was the presiding officer and did not vote filed at the 14th hour. By the 17th hour, 11 filings were in the bilateral registry. Thune filed at the 18th hour, which was 1 hour before the ratification window closed on instrument 10,849T. The delegate seated beside him watched the submission confirmation register. You have filed, the delegate said. I have filed, Thune said, under the bilateral framework. Yes. His mandibles moved in the steady oscillation of a calculation concluded. His 8-year-old note was in the registry. The thing his note had said would happen had happened. That was enough. The question of what to say to Nessavale was raised by 2 delegations separately in subsessions that ran parallel to the main chamber proceedings. Both concluded that the compact's procedural framework did not contain a form for what they were trying to say. The compact's framework was comprehensive, but it had been built by an institution that had not anticipated needing to apologize to an observer provisional for 41 consecutive years of contempt that had been filed rather than spoken. Velchereth asked Drun Yale, in a private consultation that was nonetheless on the session record because all chair consultations were on the record, is there a correction procedure for the designation category? There's a standard index amendment form, Drun Yale said. It is used for clerical corrections. This is not a clerical correction. No, Drun Yale said. But the form does not distinguish. It will accept the amendment. The window closed at the 19th hour, instrument 10,849T ratified by absence of sustained objection. Drun Yale entered the ratification timestamp. The instrument was assigned its number in the compact registry, a number that would sit beside the disarmament order in the index, which was going to require some explanatory notation when future archivists encountered it. By session's end, 38 members had filed for bilateral contact terms. 3 had abstained without public explanation. The Gorath Bilateral Assembly did not respond, which was entered in the bilateral registry under Seref Dai's delegate number as a non-response, and non-responses were a category the bilateral framework had anticipated and provided for. Thun was asked by the delegate seated beside him what he intended to do with the bilateral contact filing he had submitted. He considered this question for a moment. I intend to be in contact, he said. It already did what it was going to do. The old objection was now in the registry under 2 cross-references, the renewal cycle under which it had been filed and instrument 10,849T. That was the point of filing, and your 8-year-old note, the delegate said. What do you intend to do with that? Nothing, Thune said, to which it was the closest thing the compact had to a prior notice that this outcome had been possible. Drun Yale had added the cross-reference himself, at the close of the session, because it seemed important that the record connect those two things, and because nobody had instructed him not to. Surajvdai filed a procedural note that evening, short, under his delegate number, reviewing his statement from the morning's record and requesting that it be flagged for the committee reviewing bilateral contact protocols. The note contained no direct retraction. It contained the phrase, "The classification may have been premature." Drunyale read it when it came through the filing queue. He entered it. He did not comment on it. There was an old instrument in the compact founding archive. Below Section 14, subsection C on the same page, that Drunyale had also noticed during the registry pull and had set aside as irrelevant to the immediate procedural question. It was titled, "In the Founding Instrument's Original Language." Now, with the session closed and the filing queue cleared to normal levels, he pulled it again. The instrument was a request form. A compact observer retention request, the mechanism by which the authority could formally ask an observer provisional species to remain within the compact's framework when the authority had reason to believe that withdrawal was under consideration. It had been included in the founding instrument at the request of a delegate who had believed, at the time of founding, that the authority might need it. In 41 years of the compact's operation, the form had never been used. Drunyale located Vel Chereth's office contact channel and filed it there with a brief note. The instrument exists. It is filed under founding clause provisions. It has never been invoked. Here is the reference number. He did not recommend a course of action. That was not his role. Vel Chereth read the note at the 22nd hour of the session, when most of the chamber staff had gone home and the building's overnight systems had reduced the corridor lighting to maintenance levels. He pulled the form, he read it again. It was short a request, not an order. It asked. It did not compel. It had been placed in the founding instrument by someone who had believed that an institution worth belonging to should know the difference between compelling a species to stay and asking one to. He found the contact protocol in the bilateral registry that Nessa Vale had filed as part of Instrument 10,849T. The protocol listed a response channel. He signed the form. He transmitted it. Whether it would be answered was not something the compact's procedural framework had a mechanism for predicting. The form was a request. What happened to requests depended on who received them. Drunyale amended the index entry the following morning, in the first hour of the registry's standard update cycle. The amendment form was the same form he used for clerical corrections, because the compact's framework did not distinguish. He navigated to the entry for Species 771T Observer Provisional Non-Sovereign, and he opened the fields. Reclassification required, the form asked. Standard language. Yes, he entered. The new designation read Independent Signatory. Bilateral Registry Framework, Instrument 10,849T, ratified year 41 of the Accord. Prior designation, Observer Provisional, Non-Sovereign. He added a note to the founding instrument's cover page. In the notation field, Section 14, subsection C, invoked Compliance Year 41. See Instrument 10,849T. The word Terra now appeared in the registry under a different heading than it had appeared in for 41 years. The new heading was not better or worse than the old one in any sense the registry system recognized. The registry system recognized designation, instrument number, and date. It did not recognize the 40 years of compliance filings that had built a framework in plain sight, while the institution that received them stamped them and shelved them without reading past the cover page. The registry did not need to recognize that. The record recognized it. The record was what the record was. He submitted the amendment. The system accepted it and returned a confirmation time-stamped. Drunyale noted the timestamp and closed the field. He had 5 other items in his queue for the morning session. The Accord chamber was empty at the 7th hour. The session had closed. The delegates had filed their final notes. The overnight staff had set the chamber to standard maintenance configuration. The plinths dimmed, the translation relays in low cycle mode, the presiding chair's elevated position unlit. The circulation system hummed at its overnight register, slightly lower than the session register. The same temperature it had held in that chamber through 41 years of Accord sessions, and the one before that, and the one before that. It held only the armrest, which held only the notation Nessa Vale had scratched into it sometime in her second decade, a registry number, a date. Observation Tier 3, Plinth Row B. Position 12 held no case, no notification packet, no stack of compliance filings. 4 words in Terran diplomatic shorthand that Druniel would spend 3 days attempting to translate before concluding that the shorthand was a system he had no reference material for and filing a request with the bilateral contact protocol for a translation index. The salt-dried transit biscuit was gone from the case lid. She had eaten it on the 7 steps going back up, after the filing was done. The steps she had counted once, 31 years ago, and had never descended until the previous day. She had not looked at the chamber below when she descended, and she had not looked at it when she ascended. She had looked at the case in her left hand and the 7 steps and the gallery threshold, and then the gallery floor. The biscuit tasted of salt and of transit and of the particular dryness that transit biscuits acquired when they were not eaten for a very long time. Her mother had packed it for every assignment. You do not eat until the filing is done. The filing was done. The chamber's circulation hum carried through the empty tiers. In the registry below, the amended index entry sat with its new designation confirmed, time-stamped, cross-referenced to a founding clause that had waited 41 years to be invoked by the party it had been written to protect. Vel Chereth's session report had been filed the previous night, as required by procedure, within 6 hours of session close. In the status change notation field, he had typed the new designation. He had paused. He had added 1 line the form did not require, that the compliance record was not submission, and that a full registry audit of all observer provisional filings from year 1 forward was recommended. He had submitted it. His secondary membranes had settled, not to the smoothness of certainty, not to the splay of threat, but to something intermediate that had not needed a name before and might need one now. The armrest notation would be in that registry audit when it reached position 12. Outside, somewhere, 41 colonies were doing what they had been doing before the session and would continue to do after it. Because nothing in their day-to-day operation had changed, and nothing was required to change, and nothing would be asked of them that had not already been asked of them for 41 years by an institution that had stamped their filings and called it compliance and never read a date. A registry number. 4 words. We are still here. The chamber held the notation, and the hum, and the light from the maintenance setting, and nothing else. Past the cover page to see what they were actually building. The first filing in the bilateral contact registry from outside the chamber arrived at the 9th hour of the following morning. It was from a small delegation that had not been in the session. They had read the amendment in the registry index update. They filed under the contact protocol. They listed in the notes field 1 sentence, "We would like to be in contact." That was all the form required. That was, as it turned out, all anyone needed to say.